I've always been a fiction writer. It's just always been what I wanted to do, fiction. And I've always thought of myself from a very young age as a fiction writer. It's where I found, I've always been interested in what it must feel like to be another person. And I can remember as a child reading, some piece of fiction or something, and I can remember the first time I thought, oh, I've had that thought, whatever it was. And it was just so interesting to me because from a very young age I realized that I would only see the world through my own eyes for my whole life. This is my only point of view, and it just makes me crazy because I want to know. I mean, what does it feel like to be you? I'll never know.
You don't want to know. Hello. Thank you for coming. I'm Brock Clarke. It's Elizabeth Strout. That should be obvious. We're going to have a conversation in a little bit, but Liz has been nice enough to agree to read from the new book for a little bit.
Okay, I'm just going to read for just a few minutes. And it's not at the very beginning, but Lucy Barton is in the hospital, and she looks up after being there for a number of weeks, and her mother is sitting at the foot of her bed. Was it scary getting a taxi, Mom? She hesitated, and I felt that I saw the terror that must have visited her when she stepped off the plane. But she said, I have a tongue in my head, and I used it. After a moment, I said, I'm really glad you're here. She smiled quickly and looked toward the window. This was in the middle of the 1980s, before cell phones, and when the beige telephone next to my bed rang and it was my husband, my mother could tell, I'm sure, by the pitiful way I said hi, as though ready to weep. My mother would quietly rise from her chair and leave the room. I suppose during those times she found food in the cafeteria or called my father from a payphone down the hall, since I never saw her eat, and since I assumed my father wondered over her safety. There was no problem as far as I understood it between them. And after I had spoken to each child, kissing the phone mouthpiece a dozen times, then lying back onto the pillow and closing my eyes, my mother would slip back into the room, for when I opened my eyes, she would be there. That first day, we spoke of my brother, the eldest of us 3 siblings, who, unmarried, lived at home with my parents, though he was 36, and of my older sister, who was 34 and lived 10 miles from my parents with 5 children and a husband. I asked if my brother had a job. He has no job, my mother said. He spends the night with any animal that will be killed the next day. I asked her what she had said, and she repeated what she had said. She added, he goes into the Petersons' barn and he sleeps next to the pigs that will be taken to slaughter. I was surprised to hear this, and I said so, and my mother shrugged. Then my mother and I talked about the nurses. My mother named them right away. Cookie for the skinny one who was crispy in her affect, Toothache for the woebegone older one, Serious Child for the Indian woman we both liked. But I was tired, and so my mother started telling me stories of people she had known years before. She talked in a way I didn't remember, as though a pressure of feeling and words and observations had been stuffed down inside her for years, and her voice was breathy and unself-conscious. Sometimes I dozed off, and when I woke I would beg her to talk again, but she said, oh, Whistledee, you need your rest. I am resting. Please, Mom, tell me something. Tell me anything. Tell me about Kathy Nicely. I always loved her name. Oh, yes, Kathy Nicely. Goodness, she came to a bad end.
That was great. Can you all hear us okay? And there'll be time for questions from the audience too when we're done gabbing up here. We talked a little bit about this backstage. So I always think about your books as each book I've ever read of yours, all of them, you were born to write that book, that's the way it feels. Oh. And then it feels like you were reborn with each new book. So that each book seems to be related to something that came before, but also distinctly different.
Right.
So I have 2 parts of this question. Okay. One, does that sound right to you, or does it sound ridiculous?
Lovely.
Okay. All right.
No, I'll take that.
The other is, so this book seems different to me than the last 2. And so I wonder if you have a sense of that also, and if you could talk a little bit about the difference.
I do have a sense of this book sounding different. It's a tonal thing. And it sounds different, and it is different, and it's also first person, and I've never written a book in first person before, and that was a little bit scary for me to do that, but I kept hearing Lucy's voice, and I kept hearing the sound of her voice, And the sound of a sentence has always been very important to me because it's what conveys the story to you. So I kept hearing her voice, and I sort of didn't even really want to write it. It was just a sketch. It was a little piece of a draft that kept going around my very messy desk.
How come you didn't want to write it? That's interesting.
Because there were other things that I was working on.
Okay.
I always work on a lot of things at the same time, and there were other things that were sort of more interesting to me. But I noticed that these little pieces of Lucy kept showing up, and I know from experience when that happens that, you know, I have to pay attention to it, and so here she is.
Well, and it moves differently than the other books too.
Yeah.
The other books move more or less, well, Olive Kitteridge is different, but British Boys moves more or less chronologically. It moves back in time, and there are flashbacks, but there are flashbacks. It doesn't operate this in the same way, time in this book. And so did that come out of the voice, like out of the discursive voice? Or
It did. All of it came out of that voice. Okay. And I never write anything from beginning to end, whether it's the Burgess Boys, which does move from beginning to end. I just never write from beginning to end anything. And I didn't write this from beginning to end, but again, it all came out of the sound of her voice, and it did have a meditative quality to it that I was aware of that, and I didn't know if it would work. I just wasn't sure. But when I kept going back to the scenes that turned out to be the beginning of the book, when she's in the hospital as a younger woman, I realized that there was a retrospective part of this first person voice, so that one of the worries I have writing about first person is that you can feel inside a person's head too much, you know, sort of like you're trapped in their head if you're reading a whole book of a first person narration. And I thought, well, it helps that she's looking back on it. I thought maybe that would help.
How so? How would it help? I don't think it does, but I'm just curious.
Because it would distance the reader from her head. You know, I don't want to be in somebody's head all the time. So I assume my readers don't necessarily want to either.
Right. I mean, I think one of the remarkable things about the voice, I mean, it's a monologue. And it's a proud American tradition. We think of Huck Finn, for instance, or True Grit, or we can name a number of books like that. And there are a number of things that are really compelling about Lucy's voice, and one of them is that she doesn't always seem to be totally reliable, but she does seem to be sincere. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit, just give you a sense, if you haven't read the book, a number of the chapters begin with her saying something and then qualifying it, or qualifying it and then making it definitive, thereby undermining the definitive quality of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what makes her, in my mind, a reliable narrator. Because I kept thinking, okay, Lucy, you know, you're going to tell the truth, and Lucy is very interested in telling the truth. And so that's why she'll qualify something, like she'll say, you know, this is what my mother said, and then the next sentence might be, I'm not sure that's what my mother said, but that's what I think she said. And so that was my way of making her a reliable narrator.
Because she's trying to find something that sounds true.
She's trying to tell the reader the truth. You know, that I think it's what my mother said.
Yeah, it also should be said that she's a writer. Lucy Barton's a writer, and she takes a class. So, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, go ahead.
Well, I was curious about that choice. At what point in the process did she become a writer? I mean, it's a risky move, right?
It's a very risky move, and and that and writing it in first person, those were two big things for me. Because finally I said, okay, let's go with the first person. Let's try this, and then I didn't know that she was going to be a writer until maybe a third of the way through making these different messes that I make on, that move around the desk, and then I realized, because she stays at school, she's very poor. She comes from a very poor background, and she stays at school to stay warm, and then she starts to read as a result of being in the schoolroom, and I realized that I had written, the books brought her things, and that she felt less alone as a result of these books bringing her things. And I thought, oh, maybe she'll be a writer. And then I thought, oh, She can't be a writer. God, she cannot be a writer. Who wants to read about a writer? But I made her a writer.
Yeah. And not only is she a writer, but she's a writer who has a writing teacher named Sarah Payne, who reads in a workshop basically the book we are reading now, a version of it, and comments upon it. Often in summary. So there are like layers and layers of risk there. It's like a risk cake.
Yes, it was. You're exactly right. It was a risk cake.
So at what point did Sarah Payne come into it? And I think she's a fantastic character.
Yeah, Sarah Payne, well, originally when I wrote Sarah Payne, I was just going to have her meet Lucy in the dress shop. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of fun. And I thought, well, Lucy will just enjoy it or it'll get thrown away or something. But I just... And then, again, as it kept coming around, I thought, wait a minute, let's have Sarah be a writer that Lucy reads, so that Lucy recognizes her name, even though Sarah doesn't want to tell her name. And then that all ended up becoming part of the title.
Right, and then she sort of pursues Sarah Payne and takes a workshop with her across the country. And this is really interesting. I mean, this sounds awfully metafictional, and it is, but it's awful. Someone laughed. Which has often become a kind of slur, depending who you're talking to. I don't think it's a slur at all. And this is
I didn't.
Yeah, this is sort of the best version. Yeah, that's right. The best version of it, because there are often these truths, these writerly truths uttered, and then they're questioned and undermined. So whenever we think, this is my reading of it at least, whenever we think we're getting some sort of straight truth from the writer, the other character then questions it. Is this something you tried to do to... So for instance, there's one moment where Sarah says something to the effect of, you should never confuse a character with the writer.
Right. That's right.
But then Lucy often says she's saying true things through her fiction, through her characters. And I sense there's a kind of struggle between those two truisms.
Right. Right. That was well put.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to keep making declarative sentences, and you can agree with them, disagree with them. Let me try another one.
All right.
There's this great moment. I should break out the quote because it's so good. It comes from Sarah, but no, it comes from Lucy. This moment, it's sort of in the middle of the book, and it's after Lucy has announced she's a writer, but before we actually see her chronologically becoming a writer. And she says, I have said before, it interests me how we find ways to feel superior to another person, another group of people. It happens everywhere and all the time. Whatever we call it, I think it's the lowest part of who we are, this need to find someone else to put down. Right? Which seems to me beautifully put, but I can think of dozens of really lovely put-downs in your previous books. And a couple of them in this book, too. I mean, the mother is expert at putting down.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, is this another moment? I'm not going to give you a yes or no question. So let me put it that way. Another way. How do you feel about this?
How do you feel about it?
I think, do you want to know my answer?
Yes,
I feel that Harvard Bookstore is selling my books also, if you want to buy them. I feel like it's not wrong to allow a reader to take pleasure in an expertly framed and phrased put down, but the reader should be made complicit in the problem of putting someone down in the book, if that makes any sense. So Olive, for instance, is an expert put downer.
Right.
And I think the reader is supposed to admire that, but the reader also is aware that there's a reason for that, and also there's a price to be paid.
Right, exactly. Okay.
Yes,
that's very well.
But Lucy's different. But Lucy's different than that, right?
Lucy is different from that, and I think that there's a vulnerability to Lucy, and she is aware, very aware that people put other people down all the time, and it bothers her. And I think of Lucy as pretty open-hearted, really, basically. And so what was your question?
No, how she was different in that way from some of your other protagonists.
Right, exactly. No, right, of course, Olive stealing that bra, my goodness. That's not good behavior. Right, but the writer, as Sarah Payne says, the writer needs to not judge the characters.
That's true. Well, let me ask you another question, though. In the case of Sir Olive Kitteridge, you must have felt some pleasure in writing some of her put-downs.
But I didn't judge Olive.
Yeah, right.
That's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of fun writing that scene where she steals her daughter-in-law's bra. That was so much fun. But I didn't judge Olive for doing it.
Yeah, this is interesting.
See, that's the difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference. I totally see that. And it's also interesting when it comes to...
But you can judge her.
Yeah, the mother, right?
I mean, you can all judge her. That's fine.
Who? Which one are we talking about?
Readers.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Readers can judge her. And they should, or why wouldn't they?
But there's also a scene in this book where Sarah Payne tells Lucy Barton basically to ignore people judging her characters and her work, which I think the reader's supposed to take to heart.
Right.
It seems to be sound advice.
Right. Well, when she says never ever defend your work.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
and,
like, yeah.
Yeah, and there's something you've mentioned how open Lucy is. I don't think I've ever read a book where there are so many sort of bald, forthright declarations of love. I mean, to everyone, not just romantic love. Actually, there are very few moments of those. But to her parents, like there's this one wonderful, I won't spoil them all, but to the parents, to two random siblings in a doctor's office, to her doctor, to a neighbor, and I wonder at what point in the process did you? I mean, I've never read anything like that. I think it's lovely. I think it's beautiful and startling. Like you don't see a lot of literary characters who just announce their love for people.
Right. Exactly. But that was Lucy. That's just who she was.
Was that how she was from the beginning of the process, the writing process? No.
That was how Lucy was from the moment I began to hear that voice. It's just who she was.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. Yeah. That seems to me the biggest risk in the novel.
Well, I was aware of that. I was very aware of that at times. It's like when I bring my head up from the page and I think, oh dear, this is going to sound so, sappy. But then I put my head back down and I'd help Lucy around and I think, well, it's Lucy. And so, but I was aware of it.
Right. I mean,
it was a risky book.
Yeah, I think. And all the greater for it, I think. And the mother, in particular, is a tough character. So maybe you didn't get. I think you got a sense of the structure. But the novel ping pongs back and forth between scenes in the hospital where Lucy is for 9 weeks, correct? And her mother visits her unannounced. She just appears one day.
Just appears. Never been on a plane before.
Right. And then we go back to Illinois, to where they lived, and then you go back to New York in the future, and the novel moves that way. Tell us about your conception of the mother. I mean, Lucy has a troubled past and is often treated circumspectly. We could talk about that in a moment, too.
Right. Well, Lucy comes, as I said, she comes from a rural, poor background, and she's not seen her mother for a number of years because of her marriage. It just cut her off from her family. And then the mother shows up. I liked the mother. I mean, well, she's a piece of work, but I don't know. I guess I honestly like all my characters. I think that's just the truth of it. That's the truth of it.
Right. Well, I think this is. She's a piece of work, but that would be a good way to describe Olive too. But they seem to me two distinctly different pieces of work.
Oh my goodness, they're very different. Right.
I mean, she says some really brutal things, not just in the past, but also even in the hospital room.
Yeah. Right. Well, she is who she is.
True, but you made her that way, right?
I guess I did. That's true. I did make her.
Yeah. No, I think that's an incredibly brave thing. I think it's one of the ways that all the I love this person, that person don't become overwhelming because because they're real people. I mean, or they feel like real people, hopefully. And so, the mother, she's. But I purposely left out. We don't really know the mother's story. We know the father's story a little bit more. He's been very traumatized by the World War II, and that's how I perceived his story and why he couldn't be comfortable within himself at all. But the mother, we never really understand what her story is, and Lucy says that forthrightly. I don't know who she is. I don't know why she is this way. And
and she can't find out.
Right. That's one of the remarkable things about this book, is that there are all these gestures made to this horrible past, and they're sort of treated mysteriously because I think they are mysterious to her.
Exactly.
And you just let them remain that way.
That's right.
Yeah. Are there any?
Because there's a lot of mysterious stuff in this world.
Yeah. Are there any books you were thinking of when you wrote this? Or do you have any favorites?
Oh, I have so many favorite books, but there wasn't any book I was thinking of when I wrote this book. But I have so many favorite books. You want to know them?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I love every single thing written by Alice Munro, and I love every single thing written by William Trevor. I love Tolstoy. I love Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
You
We talked a little bit before,
Yeah.
and all those make sense. They make sense also the other books. But this book reminded me a lot of So Long, See You Tomorrow by William Maxwell. But also this book, we didn't talk about this, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Have you read that book?
No.
It's about, it's convoluted, but it has the kind of open
Wait a minute,
first-person
that's
narrative.
the one. No, I have read that. That's
Yeah.
what is that about?
It's going to sound stupid the way I put this. It's about people who are sort of raised to donate their organs.
I have read that.
Yeah.
One, yes. No, I
So
did.
in that way, it's a hospital
yeah.
book like yours is.
Right. Right. No, I did. I thought that's what. Yes, I have read that.
But it has this open,
Yeah.
forthright quality, but also it treats the past as a kind of mystery that you can't fully unpack.
That's interesting.
And I think they're
Right,
both
right, right.
lovely books. Let me ask you the question about, let me ask a question about place. So you're often, I live in Maine, so maybe I'm hyper-conscious of this, but you're often talked about as being a Maine writer. This one just totally eschews that. And it
Right.
occurs to me that over the last couple books that you've become as invested in writing about New York, the city, as you are any place else.
Well, I've lived in New York for 32 years, and I think it takes me. I recognized this about myself a number of years ago. I realized, wow, I have about a 15-year lag period. It seems like I need to either experience something or live someplace. There's about 15 years before I can use it, and so I have become able to write more about New York, because when I first moved to New York, it was also strange. It was just so strange, and it wasn't inside me yet. And so I would reach back to Maine and write about Maine. But place is very important in literature. I really think place is essential, and you've got character and time and place, and that's going to give rise to the story. And Lucy was in the Midwest because my husband and I had been driving around the Midwest, and boy, that's a place. The sky. It was just so interesting to me, and we went back out there a number of times to make sure I got it right and stuff. But the isolation of those houses is different from Maine. It's Maine. It's all sky, and there's a house here, and then there's a house there, and it was very, very interesting to me. And I just thought, oh wait, this is Lucy's origin.
Yeah, and there's one great line where the mother says, "How can you do without a sky?"
Yeah.
And she says something to the effect of, "Yes, but we have people."
Right.
That's
Right.
really. And so one last question, and then let's open it up to the audience. We talked about this too. This book seems obsessed with class and with poverty, and it's an odd question why, but that's partly what the book is about. Why people don't ever talk about class in literature or otherwise.
Right.
So how did that come about also? Did it just come about organically through Lucy? Or?
Well, it did come organically through Lucy, but the fact is I'm very interested in class, and I think not so much Olive, but all my other work has really dealt with class. And I've always been struck with the fact that nobody mentions that. Amy and Isabel, that's the story of class.
Right.
Abide With Me, that's the flip side of that particular class. And Burgess boys, those three siblings, they're all in a different class. And it never seems to me, it never reaches my ears. Maybe everybody's talking about it, but it doesn't reach my ears. And I'm interested in that. And people say that we don't talk about class in this country, and I don't think we do. And I'm not sure that we know exactly how to talk about it, maybe. But I did think, as I was writing Lucy, I was thinking how the rural poor, and I'm sure this has gotten much worse, of course, now, but the towns that I lived in when I was young, there was always a family that was so poor, they were really not allowed to be part of the community. And that's what Lucy's family is, and it's just awful.
Right. The town I grew up in, which was a mill town in upstate New York, the poorest family in town, their name became shorthand for anything disgusting, basically.
That's right.
Unspeakable, yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah.
And I, as I said, I think it's probably even more true now. But so I was interested in that, and I was interested in taking somebody from that and bringing her through, crossing the class lines, so that she started as that and then became arguably an upper middle class woman. But does she ever, what does that mean?
Right. It's not like the great thing about it, like a lot of books fall into this trap where people think wistfully, characters think wistfully about their poverty, and your book never does that. I mean, it becomes a kind of alienating experience, right?
Yeah.
People think, well, how did you go without? In this book, people say, well, how could you possibly have lived without that? And Lucy's response is a great kind of like silent shrug. It's like, I don't know, I did.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that expression, that phrase, the hospital voice. Do
Yeah.
you know what that means? I mean, I guess I can hear it a little bit. Could you talk to me in the hospital voice? I'm just curious. Is it like spoken in like almost code or fragments? Would you say? I mean, her voice, I'm serious about this. I sound like I'm being a jerk, but maybe I am. But it seems to be part of the clue to the clue to the book is that they speak in this way in the hospital, the way people do. You're aware that other people are listening, but that's the way they act all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Their conversation in the hospital became very real to me. And the more I worked through those different scenes, and the more I understood the mother, and the more I understood that they do love each other very much, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with it. And so they just talk in certain ways and talk about people from the past. That's it, yeah. The question is, it sounds mystical. It's interesting because it almost is, but it's not. Because I know what I'm doing. I mean, I know that I'm writing about people. So it's not like I enter a zone where I, hear voices. I know what I'm doing. And yet there's some aspect where I don't actually know what I'm doing. And that's why I have to keep making these messes and messes and messes. And it's always the sound of the storyteller's voice that I'm looking for. In Abide With Me, it's third person, but it is a storyteller telling you the story. And that voice is particular to that book. And I had to find that voice to tell that story. And that took me a long time. That took me many, many drafts, particularly early on, to find the voice to tell about Tyler Caskey's tale. And then when I have the voice, it's like, it's sort of like learning to ride a bicycle. It's like, okay, now I'm on the bicycle, and now I can pedal faster. Right. And it's true with every book that I write, or every story that I write. It's always the sound, for me, that will get me where I need to go, and hopefully where you can receive it. Now, Lucy's a piece of fiction. Lucy's fiction. That's what I write. I write fiction, and all my characters, I'm sure they're compilations of different people that I've met, or even parts of myself. But it's very hard for me to ever really know where these characters come from. I don't know where Tyler Caskey came from, but he was very real to me, so. Right. Olive is very much a main character. She's an MAINE character. She's like a barnacle on that rock of Maine. And when the story where she just walks through the restaurant, she's a lot to take, Olive Kittredge, I think. I love her. I wrote her. I made her. So I love her. You don't have to love her, but I'm glad you like the book. But the point is, she was a lot to take, and I would and I thought to myself as I was putting the book together, I thought, if I was a reader, I wouldn't want every story to be head-on Olive. And so the reason that I put her in the background is partly to give the reader a break, but also because I was so interested in the community as well, because she's a part of a community, and she's part of a community where we think we know somebody because we've lived next door to them for years, but we don't really know them. So, somebody sees Olive and thinks, oh, that's Olive, and somebody else sees Olive and they think, oh, that's Olive, and they're very different Olives. And then there's Olive.
Did it start as a novel, or did it start as
No, I always knew. I always knew that Olive was going to be written as stories. I just knew it. I don't know why, but I knew that immediately.
But you always knew it was going to be a collection of stories?
Yes, I did. I thought to myself, I'm going to write a bunch of stories, and I'm going to call them the Olive Stories. But they didn't like that title. This book was for me very fast. I mean, this book was probably 2 years, and for me that's like, whoa, it's enormously quick. I don't know. I don't know that it could partly be because I just know more what I'm doing and I can hear something faster. But I don't know that. I'm not sure of that. I wouldn't dare say that really. I have no idea. Next book could take me 10 years, but it's always a process to find that voice. It's always a thing. I didn't have much of a say. I didn't want much of a say because I don't know anything about movies. I know nothing about making a movie or anything, and so. But Frances McDormand and I talked a number of times. We would talk about Olive, and I spoke with the screenwriter once on the phone. Quite a long conversation, and I don't remember it particularly. And then I spoke with the director for quite a while on the phone, and that was it. And then they produced that wonderful movie. Phew. Right. That's a great question. What am I working on all the time? I'm just always writing some scene. Basically, that's how things get started, and that, as we've just talked about, that can take many years to, So I just write scenes. I just write tons and tons of scenes, and they fly around. And then eventually, a couple of them start to make sense to me. And then, obviously, they make more sense, and then I have to sit down and write a book. No, you're absolutely right. Plot, I feel, takes care of itself. You're exactly right. I don't think about plot. That's a good point. I just don't think about it. And I know writers who do. They spend a lot of time thinking about plot, but I don't. Because how I work is, when I write these scenes that you're asking, what is it I do? I will write, I write something that feels the most urgent to me at the time. That's what I do. And I will transpose it onto a character or do something, but it has to feel urgent to me for me to even write it. And because that's where the life of it is. Otherwise it will be wooden. So I've learned over the years, if I write enough scenes that have some kind of urgency, of real feeling to them, they will eventually connect. And the plot takes care of itself. That's my secret to you. I've always been a fiction writer. It's just always been what I wanted to do, fiction. And I've always thought of myself from a very young age as a fiction writer. It's where I found, I've always been interested in what it must feel like to be another person. And I can remember as a child reading, some piece of fiction or something, and I can remember the first time I thought, oh, I've had that thought, whatever it was. And it was just so interesting to me because from a very young age I realized that I would only see the world through my own eyes for my whole life. This is my only point of view, and it just makes me crazy because I want to know. I mean, what does it feel like to be you? I'll never know.
You don't want to know.
Well, just briefly, just for a second. I mean, but we don't know. Doesn't that? I mean, it just blows me away. Makes me so, I just want to know. So I make it up. And that's the truth of it. And I listen. Constantly I listen. And Jim Burgess, in the Burgess Boys, he says, people are always telling you who they are if you listen hard. And I realized, it just came back to me the other day, and I thought, who wrote that line? I wrote that line. That's a true line. And they are. People will tell you who they are if you listen. So I do listen a lot. And then I just make it up. Because I just can't stand to think that I don't know what it feels like to be you. No, I mean, I don't actually go to Starbucks. Nothing against Starbucks, it's just not my thing. But I will go to places and listen. Yeah, I mean, I'm on the subway and I listen. They don't often talk that much on the subway, but
One thing that somebody says on the subway, and you could write a whole scene.
Yeah.
And then that could just.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. And that's it. Yeah. What did she say?
She asked, where else do you go?
Oh. You don't want to be.
Purposely ride the subway so you could listen.
That's right. Do you like on a Wednesday, like today is the day I go to Dunkin' Donuts.
Today is my listening day.
In other words, do you force yourself to ride the subway so you could listen, or is it?
No, it's just no. Whenever I leave the house.
Places, in the supermarket.
Anywhere, absolutely anywhere. Wherever there are people. I just love people, I mean, to be around people. I love people, but I like to be around people. I do. Well, I've had one publisher, Random House, since the beginning, and 2 different editors. My first editor retired, and I've just been very lucky. I wasn't so lucky before then because nobody wanted anything that I wrote for 43 years. But when I was 43, I published Amy and Isabel after writing for about 40 years. And everybody's like, oh, what an overnight success. So Random House is the only publishing house that I know, and they've been very good to me, and I try not to learn much about them or the business part. I get easily excitable, and I just need to be doing my thing. So that's it.
Not very exciting.
Not very
nice,
exciting, but
very nice.
yeah, it is. It's worked for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
She started screaming then, calling them every name in the book, shouting, TDC, TDC, threat, duress, and coercion, over and over again, even as the female forced open the door and took hold of her by the left arm, and Kucha, good dog, faithful dog, went right at her.